Now, you were involved in peace negotiations. You tried to broker a deal for a two-state solution. And I'm curious what that experience was like. What kind of obstacles stood in the way of accomplishing those goals?
There were two major obstacles. The first was the United States, and the second was Israel. I was involved as an advisor to the Palestinian delegation that went to the Madrid Peace Conference and that later negotiated in Washington over 10 different sessions with an Israeli delegation. And what we realized very, very quickly is that the United States and Israel had together established ground rules which essentially precluded the creation of an independent Palestinian state, which would be sovereign, which would be contiguous, which would be viable, which would have control over its own borders. In fact, we were not even allowed to discuss statehood, sovereignty, the expansion of Jewish settlements, Jerusalem, water, borders. We were not allowed to discuss any of those things. The ground rules established by the United States and Israel said you can talk about autonomy, and all of those other issues are deferred until later. We eventually found out that behind our backs, the PLO had decided to negotiate directly with Israel. And those negotiations produced the Oslo Accords, which essentially were the bad deal that was offered to us in Madrid and Oslo. Autonomy over 5 years, and then after that, we will discuss what is to come. And what the PLO did was to recognize the state of Israel at a time when, under Prime Minister Rabin, Israel recognized the PLO as representative of the Palestinian people. Israel never recognized the Palestinians as having a right of national self-determination. Israel has never recognized that the Palestinians are entitled to a Palestinian state, which would be sovereign, contiguous, and viable. You had offers from Rabin and you had offers from other Israeli prime ministers, but as Rabin said in his last speech to the Israeli Knesset before he was assassinated by a right-wing fanatic whose heirs are today in the Israeli cabinet, whose ideological heirs are today ministers. He said, what we're offering the Palestinians is less than a state, and it will involve our control of the Jordan River Valley and of the borders. In other words, Israel was going to give the Palestinians some glorified form of the autonomy that ended up being the maximum that the United States and Israel were prepared to grant in practice. They said state, the Americans, and the United States government has always had a two-state solution. But if you look carefully, the ceiling of what the United States is actually willing to do is invariably whatever ceiling Israel proposes. So you have President Biden now basically reading off an Israeli teleprompter, and every time he opens his mouth on this subject, and essentially saying whatever the Israelis want to do is fine as long as they limit the casualties and so on and so forth. But they want to destroy Hamas, that's fine. And when he says Palestinian state, again, it has those kinds of limitations that we came up against way back in the early 1990s in Madrid and in Washington.
You answered my question before I could ask it, because I was curious what you thought about Biden. Publicly, he says he's supportive of a two-state solution. His administration claims that they're engaging in some real tough talk with the Netanyahu regime. But Netanyahu went to members of the Likud party recently. It's a story we're going to cover later today. And bragged about how, look, I'm gonna go against Biden. He's calling for a two-state solution, but I'm the one who can fight the possibility of Palestinian statehood. And now everyone's clowning Biden, but I mean, who's to say if Biden's genuine or sincere in actually wanting a genuine two-state solution where the Palestinians really do have their own independent state and have full autonomy as a result of that? I mean, I'm skeptical at this point.
Exactly. I mean, I have two things to say. The first is the United States has rarely gone above whatever ceiling the Israelis have chosen as far as what the Palestinians are to be allowed. The United States has been willing to push Israel on many, many issues, but not on the Palestine issue. I could go back to the 1973 war, to Kissinger, to Secretary of State Baker, and times when the United States has forced Israel to accept things that Israel did not want to do. Even President Obama did that with the Iran nuclear deal. But on Palestine, no American president has ever really pushed the Israelis. And that's even more true of this president, who I think is probably the most committed Zionist ever to sit in the Oval Office. The other thing is the Israeli side. This is a government which comes out of a tradition which way back when it first came into power in 1977 had as its platform, I'm talking about the Likud party, to which Netanyahu belongs, of course, as the leader of that party. They said there will be nothing but Israeli sovereignty between the sea and the river. That's always been Israel's objective, absolute sovereignty in all of Palestine. And whatever happens to the Palestinians is under that ceiling. And the United States has never challenged that. And what I say to people who say two-state solution, you want a two-state solution? Roll back settlements. You want a two-state solution? End occupation. 56 years of occupation, the United States has done nothing to end it. In fact, we give them the guns to maintain the occupation.
True.
We give them $3.8 billion a year with which they maintain that occupation. We allow tax-free dollars to flow to settlements, 501c3s, headed by people like Jared Kushner, siphon hundreds of millions of dollars to the settlement enterprise. You want a two-state solution? Stop settlement, end occupation, and start arguing with the Israelis about real sovereignty for the Palestinians. No American president has ever done those things.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.